Welcome to Real World Craft CMS. I'm Ryan Ireland, and I'll be your instructor for this course. In this course, we are going to learn how to build a production level project using Craft CMS 4. And this can be something similar to what you might encounter in a client project or an internal project at your job. In our case, it's going to be a classic marketing site for a travel company offering outdoor experiences. And we're going to set up and configure this content marketing site and then implement best practices so it'll perform well in production, just like we would expect with a real site, as well as focus on high quality build and content authoring experience. So we're going to start by standing up a new Craft CMS project using the Craft Quest starter project. And this starter project uses Docker. And in my opinion, it's the easiest way to get going with a reliable local development environment that you can get up and running quickly. And once we have that set up, we'll implement the site's features, learning the fundamentals of building a real-world Craft CMS site. We're going to code Twig templates to output the content, as well as make the template code reusable with extended and included templates. So here's what we're going to cover in the course. First, about content modeling strategies. How can we take the content requirements, whether we glean those from the designs or from some other document, and convert those over into sections and fields, field types, and field layouts in Craft CMS. And we'll do that with conditional fields, with building our field layouts, using the matrix field, and some other Craft native field types as well. We'll look at Twig template best practices, how you can structure your templates in a way that they're more manageable, but not overdone. Have we all seen templates that have been overdone, overly abstracted? We won't do that. We're going to keep it really simple, but practical. And we'll jump into important things like eager loading, lazy loading, using the new Laravel collections in Craft 4, and then how we can work with asset volumes for images with remote sources and setting up image transforms. Important in every marketing site, of course, is solid technical SEO implementation, and we'll even tie in some Git version control strategies so we have a little bit of Git in there as well, since that really does help make a project flow. My goal is to emulate as close as possible the experience of building a real-world Craft CMS project that is ready to be deployed to a production server. One important note is if you haven't built anything with Craft CMS before, you'll want to first watch and complete the Craft CMS Quick Start Guide. This is a primer on the fundamentals of Craft CMS, and it doesn't take very long. It is only made up of 10 videos, and you can complete it maybe in about an hour. But this will give you your bearings, let you kind of see how the different pieces of Craft work, and you'll want to go through that before you jump in to this course. In this course, we are building a marketing site for a fictional running adventure company called TrailQuest. This site has all of the typical features you'd see in a content project that you would encounter in the real world, and it's one that is perfectly suited for Craft CMS. So let's take a look at the different parts of the site, and what we're looking at here are just the static templates. So this isn't a fully produced version of the site. That is what we're going to do in this course. So rather than look at the site completed, we're going to look at the site the way that you would approach it in a real world project, which is that maybe somebody had already built out these templates. And these templates are available on GitHub, and they are built with Vite, and you can actually clone the project and build them locally. tweak them if you want, or just grab them here at this public URL just for viewing. So starting on the homepage, we have a collection of the major content types. And the first one here is adventures. And we see it down here at the bottom with trail running adventures. And there's these different adventures listed out here. Now, all of these would have different names. I have a couple of samples here that you can see. When you click through one, you are brought to the adventure landing page or entry page with the name of the adventure, some descriptions, some data points for how far you'll run or hike, the amount of days, the elevation gain, and then the cost, and then a call to action link to reserve your spot. And then we have some copy about it, things to consider. And on the right, we would have some photos, perhaps from the location or past adventures. And at the bottom, we'll have some trail running locations where people can then click through to look at other adventures, and then just the rest of our page. So back on the home page again, scroll down, we also have these trail running locations here. And those are a way of grouping together different adventures. So the trail running locations, you can think about being a location landing page with then an adventure or multiple adventures listed and attributed to it. All right, so in the main navigation, if you click on adventures, you'll get brought to this adventures listing page, which is essentially what we just saw, but its own dedicated page, great for SEO and great for just a way of having a fuller view of all of the available adventures. We have a general content page that we will use for all sorts of different things like the facts, the about. This could even be for the locations as well, with just a title, some copy, and some images here. And this is where we would have the ability to build something with more of a rich content display. And then we also have another template here for the contact form. Right now, this is a very basic form. We have mocked up a message here for a successful submission, and we have some contact information placeholder stuff on the left. And at that point, that's all of the actual templates that we have, but we will use those templates as the basis for building out all of the different views on the site. So this is TrailQuest, and when we're done, we will have a fully functioning and working site that someone could then come browse and look through all of the different trail running adventures that are available. Now, one important thing to note is that we are not going to build the registration process, the ability to sign up and pay to go on an adventure. That is something that will come later in a commerce component of Real World Craft CMS, which will be Real World Craft Commerce, where we'll then build on top of this site and enable commerce with it. But for right now, we have plenty to build with TrailQuest, and I'm looking forward to getting started and building the site with you. Our next step is to install and set up our project. I've tried to make this as simple as possible for you so that we are all running the same project together. And that way, what you see on my screen will be exactly what you see on your own screen. Because of that, I've decided to use a starter project. And this starter project is based on Docker. And in order to get it to run, you do need to have Docker Desktop installed. The easiest way to get it, if you don't already have it installed, is to Google for Docker Desktop, click on the first search result for docker.com, and then it will show you the options for your operating system. Once you have it installed and running, you should have a little container whale ship thing in your toolbar, and just click on Dashboard. And then you should see the Docker application, which will look something like this. It may not have any containers or apps, depending if you already have it installed and are using it. That's all you need to do. The starter project will do all of the building and configuring of the containers for you. So you don't have to worry about any of that. The starter project is linked along with this course and the video. And this is a Craft CMS 4 starter project based on Andrew Welch's Craft 3 scaffolding project. And what I did is I simplified it as well as updated it for Craft 4, added a couple things that are specific to this course. And this one uses Vite as the build tool. And what that's going to get us is really the ability to automatically build our Tailwind CSS, which is what we're using for the CSS for this sample project, and also some hot module reloading. And mostly for us, that's going to be the automatic reloading of the browser when we update our Twig template. So this ensures that we are all running the same project, and I have set this up as a template project. So make sure you're logged in with GitHub and then click on Use this template. And it'll create a new repository for you based on that template. So we'll call this one Trail Quest. And you can make it public or private. We'll make this one public. And then create repository from template. Now this is going to copy over that starter project into your own repository with all of the files and directories. Essentially just copy it, and it should show that it's generated from CraftQuest Craft Starter Vite. Okay, with that done, we are now ready to clone that project to our local machine. So we'll click Code, copy our GitHub SSH URL, and then on the command line, we'll just run git clone, paste in the location on GitHub, and that will create a directory based on the name of the repository inside of the current working directory, which is for me just a training directory. And then it's going to clone it, and there we are. So I'm going to cd into that directory and just list out the contents to make sure that it all looks good, which it does. So at this point, I'm going to open this up in my IDE or in my code editor. And for me, this is PHP Storm. You can use whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to use PHP Storm because I like the integrated terminal, which I can access here. And that way we can kind of see what is going on as we're working on our project. So to get the project up and running, and that includes building everything, all the containers, and then making it available in the browser at localhost port 8888, we'll just run make dev. And there's a series of make commands that are available that bundle up a bunch of the behind the scene things that this project needs. So just run make dev. And this will take a few minutes because it's going to download all of the images and then build those Docker containers. If you want to, you can open up Docker and you can see that it spun up this project here with all of the different containers. What we're going to wait for is to see that is ready to handle connections. So right now it's just installing everything, and this will take a few minutes. And this is mostly a one-time process. This longer wait, spinning up the project for subsequent work is going to be very quick. Okay, now if we go to our browser, go to localhost, and then 8888, you can see we get Craft Starter Vite. That looks good. And if we go to /admin, we get our admin. And if I can log in with admin as the username and then password as the password, and then sign in. And there we are. We're running Craft 4.2.0.2, which is the latest as of the recording of this video. But you'll always get the latest version when you spin up the project fresh. So the next bit of setup we need to do is in a new terminal window or tab, I'm just going to run make build. And what this is going to do is build the project as if we were building it for production. But most importantly, it's going to create the dist directory inside of our web directory, which is one thing that we need in order to get all of our things like favicons and all of that stuff working properly. So we're just going to do that. And that's just a one-time thing, just so everything looks proper on the front end. All right, and that is all done. And if we look in CMS web, we should now have a dist directory, which has our critical CSS and our manifest files and some assets for favicons and JavaScript and CSS, all that good stuff. So next up is to get some of the static assets from the templates project. Now, this is the project that I have linked with this course, and this is what contains all of the static HTML templates for the design of our project. So you want to make sure that you download the latest release of this project as a zip file. And once you have access to that, inside of that downloaded directory, you should see an images directory. And I want to take those images that are in there, including the logo. I'm going to copy them over into the project that we just spun up. And I'm going to drop those into CMS web. So this is our public directory. And then image and site. You can remove anything that's in there already and then drop those in. After you download the zip file with the templates, you'll also want to open it up in your code editor or IDE. And that's because we want to access the static HTML for each of the design screens. And these are the templates that I showed in the previous video where we looked at what we're building. And the reason I want you to have access to this now is because we are going to take this static code and put parts of it into our Twig templates. And we're going to start with the index.html template, which is our home page. Now, I only want to copy over everything and including the body tag. So not the entire document, just the body tag. That's because all of this header stuff is already going to be provided for us, and it'll have all of the Vite automatically generated goodness in it. So if we go over to our Trail Quest project that we have running and go to CMS and then templates and then index.twig. So I'm just going to minimize this right now so we can see everything. And you can see in the head, there's a bunch of stuff here for critical CSS. We're getting the app.ts file and passing that into Vite. And then we're showing our web app.html, which has where we're inlining a bunch of stuff like favicons and manifests and stuff like that. We don't have to worry about any of that. So we're going to collapse our head and just go into body, remove it, and then paste in the body from our static templates and save that. Now, if we go back to our browser, and you can see, if we load that up, you can see we get the favicon, so that's all working. Our name looks good. You can see we kind of get a design here, some images, but not everything. We need to make a couple updates to the paths of those images so they work properly. So remember, we pasted these images into image site. You can see now that's there. And it's auto reloading as we make changes. And so we have another image to update. Right here, another logo image. So IMG site, and then the background image. Right here. All right, so now you can see this is all working, and it looks like what we saw in the last video. We have our logo, we have this background image, our headline. We scroll down, we have our adventures listing, some quotes, and our locations. Of course, all of this is static, but that's our starting point. And I like to start so that we can see it working, and then piece by piece, we'll light it up and make it dynamic using Craft. So the next step is to look at our project and see what we have here. So I'm going to git add everything. And then I'm going to git commit -am. So I'm going to add anything that's staged and then leave a message. And I'll say initial commit after cloning starter project. And if I do a git status, it should be a clean working tree and a git log. And there is our first bit of work for the project. Now, because this is real world Craft CMS, we are going to be using Git and committing our changes as we go. I can also Git push those back up to our remote repository on GitHub. When I go over here and reload, you can see it's going to have my latest commit with the changes. Now I could clone this down on any other machine, run make dev, and I'll have the exact same project that I'm working on here. Okay, so we have our Craft project up and running. It's working locally. I'm able to access the homepage and see my starting point for the homepage. And I'm also able to look through all of the different settings and configuration here in the control panel. I could go in and change the site name if I wanted to. And we're now ready to start building out our content by modeling the content that we see on the front end right here. And that's going to be what's next here in real world Craft CMS. Our next step is to plan out the basic structure of our content model. Now, our content model is when we take what we see in our visual designs and in other supporting documents like wireframes or other project documents and convert that over into settings and configuration in Craft in terms of fields, sections, globals, and so forth. So that's how we create our content model. But one caveat here is that we don't want to do too much too soon, meaning I don't want to go through the entire site and plan the content model right now. I might do a first pass and just say, oh, this is roughly what I think it's going to be, because our plans could change as we dig further into the site build. So we could get into it and realize that some of the assumptions we had earlier were not correct. We have to go back and redo some work, and there tends to be a lot of ties between the different settings. So rather than do too much too soon, I encourage everyone to do an iterative approach. So we're only going to plan some sections and templates now and then do them step by step. Building a site like this in the real world, a typical client or customer site, is an iterative process, and it's not a plan it all out and then build it process. You can do it that way if you want, but you'll more than likely not need to go back and redo some configuration. So why do I start with the homepage? Honestly, partly it's just a habit of mine. It's also because that's typically a page that gathers different types of content and presents them together. You can see on this homepage that we have some sort of homepage hero here with a headline and a tagline. And we also now have trail running adventures. So this is some collection of content, these different adventures. And we have some quotes. We also have locations. So this is also some type of content as well. That's probably in a bucket of content. And that's really all there is. But from here, I can kind of see that, oh, there's like, a handful of different content types right here. And then I can look up at the nav and say, oh, there's some FAQs. Here's an about page, a contact page. I already know about adventures and locations. I can already kind of guess generally what the site's content needs are. It's probably not complete, but at least gives me a general idea, since not all of the content on a site is going to surface and bubble up to the homepage, but typically a lot of it will. So back in our code editor, we have our README file. I'm going to create a new text file, and we'll just call this content model.md for Markdown. We'll add it to Git, and we'll just put this up as our content model. Now, I like to take notes. You can do this in a notebook. You could do it right here in the document. I'm going to do it here in the project in a document so that it's easier for you to follow along, since you can't really see the notebook that's down here on my desk. All right, so let's start with the homepage. What do we need on the homepage? So typically I create homepage as singles. So a single is a section type in Craft. There are a few different section types. We have a channel section, which is a collection of non-ordered or hierarchical content. We have a structure section, which is hierarchical content. Maybe you have to nest different things under each other. And then we have singles, which are just one-offs, typically like a home page. It could even be an about page. And these singles get their own field layouts. And that's kind of the advantage, is that you can customize it to just that page. So we're going to make this a single. So what are the fields that we would need for this? I can see that I have a headline, right? I have this headline right here. I have some sort of tagline, and I have an image behind it. This is only for the homepage. This is going to be very specific to the homepage. If I scroll down, okay, I have these adventures. This is going to pull in from another section. And I'm going to create that. And then I have these quotes. I'm not sure how I want to handle those yet. I could have a section of quotes and just pull in a random one here. That's one way of doing it. These locations, again, this is going to list out probably from a category or from another section, the different running locations, and another quote. So for this, I'm probably going to need a field for the headline, a field for the tagline, and a field for the image. So we'll say we're going to have a headline, and we will have a tagline and an image. And those are really the fields that we need specifically for the homepage that aren't section content pulled from other areas. And I know that my headline, I really want to control the formatting of it, so I'm not going to allow it to have formatting. Same thing for the tagline. And the image, I only want to allow one image. This will be no formatting. And this will also be no formatting. And the reason we do no formatting is so that a content editor can't go in and potentially add an image to the headline or do something else to make it not appear as it should within the design of the site. So we add those restrictions by not allowing any formatting, and typically that's through making it a plain text field. So that's generally the content model for the homepage. I do have these running adventures, and I will work on those, but for the homepage, that's all I have to create. So in the next video, we will go into our settings in Craft and create those. With our initial content model set here for our homepage, which we're going to create as a single, and then 3 fields to handle the homepage specific content. So we're now ready to jump into our CMS and create that homepage single. So from the dashboard, we're going to go into settings and then sections. And we don't have any sections yet, so we'll create a new one. We'll call this section homepage, so it's completely clear what it is, and choose single as the section type. And that changes our settings down here. We want to check the box with the home icon, denoting this as the homepage, and then choose the template. In our case, we're going to choose the index.twig template that came with the project. Our templates in Craft, and in this project specifically, live inside the CMS directory and then the templates directory, and we already have our index.twig template. So we'll specify that. So anytime we visit the home page of the site, it will render the index.twig template. And then for our preview targets, we will just give it a label as the home page. It's going to use the standard URL, and we'll set it up to auto refresh. So we can save and edit our entry types. Now, because we are using a single, we only get one entry type. We click on the entry type, which is named after the section. You can see this is where we build our field layout. By default, singles will have the title field disabled. You can see that right here with the slash over the I. And if I check the box, I can enable it. We're going to leave it disabled because we're going to use the headline as our main text on this layout. But we do need to create the fields, and that's in a different part of the control panel. So we go back to settings, go to fields, And now we can add a new group. So I'm going to add a group called common, which are going to be common fields that we reuse across field layouts. And then I'll create another group called homepage, which is going to be the homepage specific fields. So for the homepage, we're going to create a new field, and this is going to be for the headline. So we'll call it headline. We'll let it create its handle on its own. We'll say the headline on the homepage. And for the field type, we'll choose plain text, and everything else can be left alone. We're not going to allow line breaks, and we're going to make it plain text. So that means they won't be able to create multiple lines, and they won't have the opportunity, and by they, I mean the content authors, have the opportunity to create any formatting. So we'll save that. The next one we want to create is the tagline. So we'll create a new field in our homepage group. We'll call it tagline. We'll say this appears under the headline on the homepage. Again, plain text and no line breaks, and then save that. Now, one thing that we could do here is that we could put headline and tagline under common, because we might want to reuse those in other field layouts. Now, that's something that I could refactor to in the future, but for right now, I'm going to leave them under homepage. The one field we do want to create under common is the image field, and that's the one for this background image that the text overlays. Because we're going to create a generic image field that we can use all different places. So create a new field in the common group. We'll call it image. And then the default instructions will leave blank. The field type is going to be assets. And we're going to just drop it into the site asset source, which is already created for us as part of the starter project. And we want to allow uploading directly to the field. We only want there to be a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 1. And it says relations because assets are related, but it's really, we only want the ability to upload a single image and select a single image. So we do 1 and 1. And for the label, we'll say add an image, since that makes more sense than an asset. And that's all we need there. So we'll click save. So that one is there. Now we'll be able to customize this when we add it to the layout. So if we go back to settings, to our sections, and edit entry types, we're in our layout now, and I can take our headline, drag that up here, our tagline, drag that there, and our image, and I'm actually going to put the image at the top right there. Now, clicking on the gear, I'm going to give this a different label. So we'll say hero background image, make that required, and give it some descriptive instructions. Hero image that sits behind the homepage headline and tagline copy. If we had any user conditions or entry conditions, we could do that, but we don't since we're in a single. And for the headline, again, we could say homepage headline if we wanted to. We want to make that required. Homepage tagline, also required. And that's all there is to it. And the title won't show at all. We have it hidden, and we will save it. So now if I go to entries, you can see we have a singles grouping here, and there's our home page. Click on that, and now I can update the home page to have a hero background image. So I can upload a file, and we'll go in and find that file that we added. There we go. We'll add that one. And we're going to give it a headline. We'll just copy this so we show the same thing and a tagline. And drop that in. So now we're going to save our changes. And now we have created the content model and the structure for our content. Our homepage is a single and it has 3 fields. And then I've even added in the content for that. The next step for the homepage would be to populate the template to show this dynamic content. But before we do that, we want to build out another section in the next video, and then we'll jump back and code the homepage once we have all of our content kind of figured out. Looking back at our homepage, we scroll down and look at these trail running adventures. And we talked about this earlier, that we're going to plan these as a channel section where each adventure is an entry in that section. Classic use for a channel section. And what do we have here? We have an image and we have a title, which is the name of the adventure, and then a short description. And then if we look over at our static templates, and I am just pulling those up on the GitHub Pages URL, this is the page for an individual adventure. So at the top, we have the title. And again, this is going to be that short description. And we also have these statistics here. So we have the name of the stat and then the stat itself. So we have 4 of those. We have this call to action link with some text and then a URL behind the scenes. And then we have some rich text here, some more rich text, and another call to action. And then off to the right, we have a series of images. And they just kind of stack and skew in placement as they go down. And then further down, we have some more trail running locations and the quotes and then the footer. So we want to build out the section, the fields, and the field layout to support our adventures. And as we go, we'll also just create the placeholder templates so that we have those created based on the names that we add into our section configuration. Now, we're not going to code the twig templates right now, but I like to create them as we go so I don't miss any. And then there are these blank twig files waiting for me to drop in the code. So let's go into our control panel for our project and go into settings and sections, and we'll create a new section. We're going to call this one adventures, and we'll get the handle adventures, and the type is going to be channel. Now for the site settings, I want the URI format to be adventures / and then the slug. And that's what Craft provides us by default, so we'll keep that. And then for the template, we'll also use the default, which is adventures and then _ entry. In our code, I'm going to go into CMS and then the templates directory and create a new template directory called adventures. Again, this matches the handle of the section. And then inside of there, we'll create a template called _entry.twig. And we'll add that to Git since we're working in a real world project here. And we'll add a twig comment and just call this the adventure entry template. So adventures and then _entry. That's going to be the template that Craft will use to display an individual entry. We'll default the status to on. And for our preview targets, we'll leave them as they are because I'm going to have an entire video on setting up the preview targets. Okay, let's save and go to our entry types. We'll have a single entry type for this section. And it'll be called default. And this is where we'll create our field layout. But first, we need to have our fields created. So we'll go back into our settings and go to fields. For this section, we're going to create a couple of standalone fields and then a matrix field to create a page builder or content builder that will allow the content editors to customize in a limited fashion the page layout. We have two options when content modeling in Craft CMS. We can create a strict field layout that exactly matches what is in the template. One field per content type with tight controls over the page layout. As an example, we have a field for the title, a field for the short description, perhaps a field for 4 of these stats, and then maybe a field for a call to action, and a field for the rich text, and then another field for the call to action, and then a field to handle these 3 images. So what we see on the page and what the content authors can do on the back end would be very tightly bound. They couldn't stray at all from exactly what is shown on this content. That is an okay way to work in some scenarios. But we want to offer a little bit more flexibility while also maintaining control over the page look and the layout, because we don't want to just offer up some unlimited WYSIWYG editor field that just allows them to do whatever they want. And next thing you know, you have Excel spreadsheets on your page. But we do want to give some flexibility while maintaining some control. And that's kind of the nice balance you want to create when content modeling and considering a good authoring experience. The other option is to create a content builder using a matrix field, and each block of the matrix field would be one of these available content types. So we might have a content type for a stat, and that would be a block, and you could create 2 or 4. We might have a block for a call to action, and a block for rich text, and a block maybe for images. And then we allow people to create as many rich text fields or sections that they want. Maybe they can intersperse some stats in between them, some call to actions. They have a little bit more flexibility over how the content looks, but we're still also constraining and reining in their ability to drastically affect how the content will look. For this section, for adventures, we're going to go with the second option. We're going to use the matrix field to build a content builder that gives content authors more control of the content on this adventure entry page. Now, they won't have free reign, but they will have some flexibility in how many different content types they can use and the ordering. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go into our settings, into fields, and we'll create a new group called adventures. And then we're going to create another field inside of common, and we'll call this one description. This will be plain text, and we're not going to allow line breaks. And that's because we want to make sure that on the home page, it's just a very simple text outlay here. And we put that in common because we can reuse that other places, I'm sure. We're also going to create another field for images, and we're going to do that in common. Now, you might be saying, well, we already have an image field. We do, but we restricted that to a single image. So we'll use that field in scenarios where we only want to allow one image. And we'll choose assets as the field type. And we're going to allow a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 4. And we'll say add an image. Okay, we'll save that. Now, before we create the content builder field, we need to install a plugin to handle the rich text. There are several options available, both first and third party, free and commercial. But for this site, we're going to use the Redactor plugin. So if you go to the plugin store, you can search for Redactor. We're not going to install it from here. We will install it from the command line. Just going to grab the installation command so we have it. We're not going to use that entire thing. And go back into our code editor. I'm going to open a new tab. So if we paste in the full command, you can see it's going to do PHP Craft plugin install Redactor and Composer require. So I want to do composer require, but we're going to prepend make, so it runs it on the container. And then make plugin install redactor. That's going to require that plugin as a package in Composer, and then it's going to install it inside of Craft. Looks like it's done. Now if we go into settings, plugins, should have redactor and marked as installed. So back again to settings fields, we now have the field type for redactor available to us. So in the adventures field group, we'll create a new field. We'll give it the name of content builder. And the field type is going to be matrix. And now we can configure our block types and the fields. So the first block type is rich text, and we'll just let it create the handle. And the first field is going to be text. And the field type will be redactor. And we'll use the default redactor config, which gives us just a default set of buttons. And we can leave all of the other options available here. Our next block type is going to be the call to action. So remember, we are creating all the different content types here. We just created our rich text. Now we're going to create one for our call to action. So we'll call it CTA. And the first field would be text. And this text is going to be plain text because we don't want any formatting allowed. It's going to be wrapped around an anchor tag. And then the next field is going to be the URL. We can't use URL as a handle because that's protected. So we have to do CTA URL for the handle. And this field type will be the type URL. And we're going to allow web page, telephone, and email as the URL types. And our next block type is going to be for the stats. So it's going to be this section here. So we need a way to capture the name of the stat or the label, and then the stat value itself. And you can see we have two stats positioned here horizontally next to each other, and then stacked 2 and 2. So we want to think about how we're going to control how this displays. Do we want to have maybe a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 4? Because 2 side by side will look good. 4 will look good. If you want more than 4, you'll probably want to create another instance of that block rather than just stacking a bunch of stats. And that's how we can help the authors via the authoring experience create the best output possible on the page. So this one we'll call stats. And then for this field, we're going to call it stat, since each field will be a stat. And it's going to be the type of table. And I chose table because it's a really straightforward way of capturing 2 values. So for the column heading, it's going to be name. It'll be single line text. The second column will be the value of the stat. That'll also be single line text. For minimum rows, we're going to say minimum 2, maximum 4. So every time they create an instance of this block, they have to create at least 2 rows. They can't create any more than 4. That'll prevent them from creating just 1, which would just go full width, probably look a little strange. Also prevent them from stacking too many and becoming overwhelming and difficult to read. For the add a row label, we'll say add a stat. And we'll save that. So now we have our content builder saved. We're ready to create the field layout. So back into settings, in our section for adventures, we'll go into our default entry type and start to manage our field layout. So the first thing I want to do is I have my title, going to get my description, drag that over, and then we'll go into UI elements. I'm going to grab a horizontal rule just to break it up a little bit, and then pull over my content builder. I also want to capture these images, but I'm going to do it in a separate tab, so it's a little bit easier to manage, and then we'll get the images field. Save our layout, and go into entries, adventures, and let's create a new entry and see how it works. So we can see here's our title, description, our content builder, and our images. For our first adventure, we'll just use Big Bend Bounce, which is a 4-day running adventure in Big Bend National Park. And then we'll grab our little description here. And then we can start our content builder. So I'll just create some stats first. We'll say elevation gain and we'll say 46, total days, 4, and we'll say cost. There we are. All right, so now I want to add some rich text. So I just add this here. Then we can add in that text. I'm just going to copy what we have right here. Like that. Now I realize I want to have a call to action between these two. So using the gear, I'm going to add a CTA above. And we'll say reserve your spot today. And we'll choose the web page. And we'll just put in our local host for now. And then below this, I could have another CTA. And then maybe some more rich text. And we could even add some stats here if we wanted. And of course, we can drag and drop these around as we need. But that looks good for right now. Let's add our images. So we'll upload some files here. And then create our entry. So now we have created a new section, the fields, and a field layout, including a page builder field for our trail running adventures. We still have some work to do on the templates, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But great work so far as we build out our Trail Quest site. So we've been chugging along on our project here and slowly making progress building out the Trail Quest site. And up to this point, you have learned how to do both a single section, which is what we did for the homepage, and then a channel section, which we just created in the last video for the adventures. At this point, we have 2 more single sections that we need to create, but there's no reason for me to walk you through how to do those because you've already created single sections along with me. So we have our About section and the FAQs. If we look over at our static templates, which is available at craftquest.github.io, you can see this is the content page template right here. And this is what it looks like. It just has some placeholder content in here, but this is going to be the template that we'll use for both the About and the FAQs. Now, in the case of this site, we are going to make the FAQs just a single rich text field and just let the content authors just write in a series of FAQs. And if down the road, we decide that we have to break those out into a channel section, we will do that. This kind of highlights one of my philosophies when developing projects in Craft or in any content management system, or really anything that has to do with code or really building anything, is to try the simplest, most effective implementation first, and then expand and make it more complicated only when that is needed. So that goes all the way to things as simple as FAQs, We could definitely create a channel section here and have different entries for each question and answer. But for right now, we're just going to create a single section, a single rich text field using Redactor, and that will be the FAQs. The same thing with the About section. So my task for you is to go into Craft as you're following along with this site and create 2 new single sections, one for the FAQs and one for the About page. While you're doing that, you should also create the template. You don't have to write any Twig code, but just create the placeholder template inside of the templates directory, because you're going to want to assign that template as you configure that new single section for the FAQs and the one for the About page. You also either need to reuse or create a fields and create the field layout for each single section. And when you're done, you can go to the next video and watch the solution that I came up with and compare and contrast. All right, good luck creating your new single sections for the FAQs and for the About page. All right, I hope your work went really well on creating the 2 single sections for the FAQs and for the About page. Let's take a look at how I set this up, and then you can compare it to how you did it. And the nice thing about Craft and a lot of content management systems is that there's not one true way to do something. There's a lot of different ways to approach and solve the problem. So I'll show you how I did it. And fortunately, this is a really straightforward problem, so we should have similar setups. We're going to go into settings and we'll go into our sections and start there. And you can see I created 2 single sections, one for About and one for the FAQs. So let's look at the About section. We have our name. The section type is single. And for the URI, I just put About because I'm going to have it at the root of the site, just /about. And then for the template, I just did about.twig. Now, the template I created in the root of the templates directory, and I did the same thing for the FAQs, and I just dropped in a Twig comment just to denote what this template is going to be. So we can do this all sorts of different ways. Some people like to create a template directory inside of templates that says maybe something like singles or pages, or another way, maybe About, and then inside of there you have the About single, because maybe down the road there's going to be other supporting template code. It really just depends what your preference is. I like to keep it as simple as possible to start, and I could definitely see myself creating a directory under templates for all of my singles or pages or what have you. Especially if I was going to have a lot of singles, I'll probably not want them just littering the root of the template directory. And then for the preview targets, I just left the default. We'll take care of preview targets in another video. And let's see, let's go into our entry types. We have one entry type and one field layout because we are in a single. And then there's title and a field called rich text, which I created. Let's take a look at that. So we'll go into fields, into common. I created a new common field called rich text. This is a redactor field, and I just used the defaults for everything else. And this just gives me a rich text redactor field that I can use over and over again in all sorts of different field layouts. So now if I go to entries, into singles, you can see here is About TrailQuest. One thing I also did in that single is I added the title. So I checked the title to show the title. That is turned off by default in new singles. And this is my rich text field. So one thing I see now that I need to enhance for authoring experience is I didn't customize the field label. Rich text doesn't make a lot of sense. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Inside of my section, About, and then my entry type, I'm going to go click on the gear menu for the rich text field. We're going to make that required first, and we'll say About page copy. And I don't have any conditions here. Apply. And there we are. So for the author, about page copies what they'll see. But for us on the template side, when we start working with our template code, we'll still use the rich text handle. So let's save that. Go back. There we are. That's much, much nicer. And I could do the same thing for the title as well. All right, so let's look at our other single we created for the FAQs. Again, here's the title. And I did the same thing. I didn't customize this, so we'll do that. And you can see I just put the FAQs in as rich text. Both of these use the same field. So I just had the same rich text field again. Let's go back into settings, sections. We'll edit our entry type. Again, go to the gear menu, make it required, and we'll just put in FAQs there. We'll say create and apply. There we are. We'll save that. Go back to our entries. And now we have our nicer label, a little bit of a description of how to approach it, and our content. So I hope that you have something that looks similar. We now have an additional 2 singles in our project, and we are slowly making our way through trying to get our real world site set up and running. In Craft Pro, we have the option of using 1 or more preview targets, and these are URLs that you can use to preview your entry content. Let's take a look at how that works. So here is our Big Bend Bounce entry inside of the Adventures channel. And up to the right, I have this preview button. If I click on that, it's going to load a preview of this entry based on the individual entry URL. And I'll show that setting in just a moment. Now this is blank because if we go to the template for this, which is _entry, there's just a comment, there's nothing there. So let me put in an H1 with entry.title, which will output the title of the entry we're viewing. And I'll just refresh this and you can see there's the title. So just to show you how this works, it's going to automatically refresh every time we make a change and then save that as a draft. And we can then close the preview and edit our content. Now, a lot of content editors will like to work like this, where they'll have this preview here. Maybe they'll kind of stretch it a little bit to get a little bit more room. And they like to work all inside of this content here, drag and drop the matrix fields, use their content builder, and see the changes reflected on the right side. And once we have our templates built out, we'll be able to see how that works. They can also validate it in different viewports and even rotate to see how everything lays out. And then, of course, you can always manually refresh it if you don't have the automatic refresh turned on. So let's close this up and go and look at how we set up these preview targets. So in our settings, we go into our section and then the settings, scroll down to the bottom, and there's a section called preview targets. By default, we're going to get the primary entry page target, which is going to be the URL to the individual version of that entry. So adventures / and then the slug. But we want to create others as well. So I want one for the listing page, which is the adventures listing page, which for us is going to be /adventures. And I want one for the home page too, because on the home page, we have this listing of adventures, and I want to see what a new adventure would look like there as well. And that's just going to be /. We're going to have all of them set to auto refresh, and we can just add more and more as we see fit, but we'll leave those like this, and we can reorder them depending on where we want them to appear in the dropdown. So let's look at that dropdown. Go into our entries, click on preview again, and you can see now we have this drop down here. We can toggle between the listing page. Looks like we don't have that. And the home page. So we can preview them here. Let's see if we can fix our listing page. And we go to templates, adventures. So we don't have an index template. So we'll create that right now. Just comment that out. And there we go. Now it's blank, which is what we would expect because there's nothing in that template. And again, back to our primary page. So now our content authors will be able to look at the content they're creating in these 3 different contexts. Let's close our preview and go back to our settings for our preview targets for our adventures. And a couple things to note is that you can get pretty specific here. If we had like an archive of these, I could create the adventures archive or just archive. And I could do something like adventures. Maybe I have an archive template and then I have like a year or something like that. And this is a good example they have in the Craft documentation. Then this would generate the URL for adventures archive and then the year of this current entry that we're viewing. So you can see maybe in a yearly archive what that would look like. You can also use other variables like canonical ID. You can use environment variables and aliases as well. And you can also use an element query to get an element as well in here. So there's a lot you can do to get exactly what you need for the previews. Well, we're going to remove that one since we don't have an archive just yet and save this. Now for our singles, we scroll down, you can see we have our preview targets as well. And this is going to be the primary entry page, which is just the single page and the URL. It's up to you if you need to have another preview for this. You most likely don't for a single, but you might. And then also the homepage is a single. So you probably don't need different views for the homepage, although perhaps you have a different style of homepage for a different scenario. Maybe if it's a store for like the holiday layout for it or the sale layout, you might want to have different layouts that you use for the different scenarios. Then you can get those preview targets set up there. Now, one other place that we can use preview targets that's very handy is this view link here. This is going to open up a token URL. So if I go to the primary entry page, it's going to open up a URL here. You can see it's got adventures and then Big Ben Bounce, and then it has Craft Preview Token, and then a token that's going to authorize someone to view this on a limited temporary basis. Basically, until that token expires, someone will be able to review this and view this page even if it's not made live on the site. So while we're just localhost right now, that won't work, but on a live site, a content author could be in here creating content and say, hey, I want the person to see what this looks like, create this tokened URL, and then send that off and they can preview it just as if it was live, but it wouldn't be live at all. So that is the basics of how to use the preview targets in Craft CMS. As long as you have the Pro license, you're good to go. On the homepage of the site for TrailQuest, if we scroll down, we have this content block for trail running locations. These lists of locations will be different cities, states, countries, and areas like national parks where TrailQuest offers running adventure trips. The location detail page will use the same template that we're going to use for the adventure entries. Instead of information about an adventure and how to sign up, the template will display the location name, some information, maybe some statistics about it, a few photos off to the side, and some rich text. So it's going to be basically the same layout, but just information about the locations. And then we'll also have a list of the different adventures that take place at that location. When it comes to this type of content, we can handle it either in a category or in an entry. So we could have a set of categories that are all locations, or we could have a set of entries that are locations. Both element types will require a relationship field for categories via a category field and for entries via an entries field. So the authoring experience is very similar. There'll be one slight difference in where they manage the content, whether it's categories or entries, but that's really the only difference. With categories, we can get field layouts just like we can in the entries. So in the channel section, we have our field layout with our entry type. The same thing we get in categories as well. So it's a judgment call that should be based on your content authors, and even just what your preference is as a developer. For this site, we will use a category group and categories to store the locations. This is for two reasons. One, I think it would be a good authoring experience, and honestly, it makes semantic sense because we are creating a set of adventures, so these entries of the different adventures you can sign up for, and the adventures are categorized by location. It's like an attribute to that adventure that helps describe that adventure, so a category makes sense to me. And also, there's a practical reason, which is that we've already created a channel section for the adventures, so I would like an opportunity to show you how to create a category section as well, and you can walk through and learn that with me. So with that in mind, let's start configuring our locations in Craft. So we're in Settings, and we're going to go to Categories, and then we don't have any category groups, so we'll create a new category group called Locations, and the maximum levels that this category group can have. I'm not going to allow nesting right now. That may be something that we want to do in the future, but for right now, we're going to leave it just a single level. And then for the site settings, our category URI format, so the URL where we'll access the categories, so locations/slug is exactly what we want. So let's say locations/Austin-Texas, and we need to have a template. So let's go ahead and create our template. And we have a couple options here. So I can do it in its own group, or I can do it under adventures. I'm going to do it in its own directory. So we'll create a new directory called locations. And again, all of this is really up to you. I prefer to do it so that the sections and the categories all kind of are handled the same. So a new file, we'll just do category_category.twig and add that to Git. And while I'm here, I'm actually going to create a index.twig. I don't have any plans to use that right now. However, that'll give us a landing page with a list of all of the locations. _category.twig inside of our locations directory inside of the templates directory. So now we can do locations/_category.twig. And now we can build our field layout. See, we don't get an entry type here, right? Because we're not creating entries. We get our field layout right here in the settings. I'm going to have a title, which is going to be the name of the location, but I want to be able to build out all of this content. So here's something to think about, is that this content builder that I already created, I'm thinking I could reuse that for here. Let's drag it over and take a look. So there's our content builder. It's going to give it a little bit of a horizontal rule and then save it. So if we go into categories, you can see we have this categories item now appear on the sidebar because we do have a category group. I'm going to create a new category. I give it a title and some rich text. So if I look back, one thing I'm missing is this description. And I also want to have the images as well. So let's add those in. So go back to our settings, categories, into our group, scroll down, and we'll add a, images. Going to add another horizontal rule, and then the description will go up here. We'll try that. Save it. Go to our categories, create a new one, So let's start with that. Austin, Texas. All right, so I can add my rich text right here if I wanted. A call to action, I could add some stats. I don't have to. And then I can also add some images. We'll just add these two and create our category. So there we are. We have our category saved. So we also have the ability to preview our category using that underscore category twig template that we set up. Of course, we don't have anything in there right now, but if I went into it again and just did an H1 with category.title, you can see there it is, Austin, Texas. If I change it, it'll auto update. And we can save our category. So you can see a category is also an element in Craft. And so it has a very similar interface for editing and creating them. And that was done on purpose so that categories as elements and entries as elements start to become closer and closer together. And it also makes for a better authoring experience as well. So our next step then is to load up the categories here and create a few additional categories so we have some to work with. And that way, when we get to the part of building out our templates, we'll have some categories to work with, including the categories that are going to display here in trail running locations. Now, for our other template here, where we're going to show the adventures that are assigned to that category, that is going to happen automatically as long as we make that relationship. And that's the next thing that we need to do. So let's go into our settings. We're going to go into fields and then adventures and create a new field called location. And then for the field type, it's going to be a category field type. The source is going to be locations. This is that category group. We only have one. The number of selectable category branches. So ideally, I'm only going to say one, because I'm going to say, well, there's only going to be one location, but we could have a running adventure trip that hit multiple locations. So we're going to leave it blank. For the selection label, we'll say add a location. That's going to give us a better authoring experience. So it's set to exactly the type of content they're working with, and then save. And now we can go into our section entry type for adventures and edit our field layout. For content, we're going to go into, let's see, we'll create a new tab called location. And we'll add in the location here. And perhaps we'll organize it like this. So there's something to be considered here for where this location field goes. It could go here. Actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, I think it's better to have a location up top here, since that's pretty fundamental to this trip. So we'll put it right there. I'm going to remove this and save. Again, this is the type of thing that as you work inside of Craft and as you develop the site, add in some sample content, some realistic sample content, and look at it and say, hey, is this going to be a good authoring experience, or is this not going to be a good authoring experience? So there's the location. Click Add Location, Austin, Texas, select, and done. Of course, I can add multiple locations if I want, and save. Now, inside of here, I'm going to make a quick authoring adjustment experience. I'm going to customize these columns that are at the top of the table view, and I'm going to find this location. Let's move that up to the top so we can see it. Going to remove expiry date and post date. Not so important, just for at a glance, and author either. But the location and the link to view it are perhaps better. We'll save that. There we go. Entry, Big Bend bounce. Of course, it's not going to be in Austin, Texas. It'll be in Big Bend National Park, but That'll be good enough for right now. So now we have created a category group inside of Craft CMS. We have created a field layout for that category with all of the content that we would be able to put into an entry, but we're doing it within the scope of categories. And we created a couple of category templates as placeholders. And so now we're all set with our categories and really lined up and ready to go for some template work in just a little bit. All right, thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you in the next video. You'll remember from a previous video that our homepage is set up as a single section type in Craft. And you can see that right here is our homepage, and it is the type of single. Because Craft knows that the homepage is a single, because if we look at the settings, we designated this single as the homepage right here. Then it knows when it renders this index.twig template that it should provide the data for this single automatically. So that's anything that we drop into this single here. So our background image, our headline, and our tagline, all of that data is provided automatically to the twig template. And it's available via the entry object that is provided through Craft. And later on, you'll see the same setup for individual entry views. Since the homepage is the first template we're tackling, we'll also do some template refactoring to reuse the markup and code that other templates will also use. Earlier in the course, we pasted in the static template code that gives us this page you see here to ensure that our homepage was rendering as we expected. Now, since that markup is already there, we can jump right into adding some twig to make this static template dynamic. And we're going to focus first on this hero section. Everything above here, this navigation, that's going to be universal across the site. However, this hero section is the first thing that is unique to the homepage. So back in our template, going to go up to the top and find just like our head here. I'm just going to collapse that down just so we can minimize what we don't need to see in this div here as well. So we want to look at this main element, and then I'm going to unnest right here in this max width full. And this is our hero section for the homepage. Put a quick comment in there so we can go to it quickly again. And we have our background image that we're using here, object cover on via Tailwind. And that's hard coded right now. And then we also have our title and then the tagline. So let's output the tagline first, which is surrounded by a paragraph tag. And remember, I said that we are going to have access to the entry object, and that's just entry. And then we can access the different properties. And in our case, these are going to be the field handles. Now, because this is a single section type, again, we automatically get entry. And inside of this, we have all the data we need about the homepage, including the data in the fields that we created. So the field for the tagline has the handle tagline. So we just do entry.tagline. And we access it as a property of entry using the double curly braces, which is the twig output tag. So we'll save that, and our homepage should automatically reload with our setup. And you can see it's right here. And we just want to make sure it matches what is here, and it does. And we'll just make it shorter. To test it, we'll save that, reload, and there we go. So now we're dynamically outputting our tagline. Next, we'll output the headline, and the headline is wrapped by a H1 element and also some span tags with the class block, which essentially break this into multiple lines so it doesn't stretch the full width. So it's a shorter line width and more readable. Now, if we just drop in here entry.headline, let's say we just drop it inside of here and get rid of that span tag. So just inside of one span tag, that will output the headline. But you see it does it all in one line. Ideally, I want to shorten that line length and I want it to stack. Now, what we were doing in our Tailwind classes and our markup is we were using the span and block to essentially create different block styled elements automatically. So there's a couple of ways that we can work around this, but I want to teach you a small power move to manipulate data in Twig. And while this could be considered maybe intermediate or intermediate advanced, it's a great skill to have, and I think it's important to show it now. So we're going to use the batch filter to chunk the headline into groups of 4 words. If there are less than 4 words left in the last batch, then it'll be whatever is left. The result will be that no line will have more than 4 words, but the last one may have less. So the first thing we want to do is set the headline. So we'll do set headline, set the variable called headline to entry.headline. So that's the headline. And we're going to use the split filter and split on the space. So that would be the space between words. Next, we are going to loop over each of the words in headline and then batch them into 4s. So we'll say 4 words in headline. And then we're going to use the batch filter and an integer to specify the number of items inside of a headline, which we should include. So remember, headline is basically an array at this point. We say 4, and then we're going to do end 4 to close our for loop. And for each time this loops through in a batch, it's going to output a span tag and then something here, so the words. Now here is where we need to do another for loop to loop over the items that have been batched together. So we batch them out of this headline array into another array, and now we have to iterate over those to output each word. So we say 4 word in words, referring to this here. And then we can just output the word and close our for loop. So we're setting headline to the actual headline out of Craft. We're splitting it by the spaces between the words, and then we're iterating over that array and batching them into a collection of 4 each. And then we're iterating over those words each time. So that way, this span will be created for every group of 4. And then inside of the span, we'll iterate over that group of 4, or less than 4 if there are less. So the end result is a headline that never runs along while also maintaining a simpler authoring experience because the author doesn't have to worry about breaking those words up. We'll take care of that for them. So if we look back here, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, get out and explore the trails, and then the remainder is 2, so those are at the bottom. If I change this to with us today, so now I just added with us today, I just added 3 more words. We're probably going to get 3 lines. We'll save that. And you see, get out and explore the trails with us today. So again, that breaks like that. Now, because we've set up our preview targets, I can click preview, and you can see this is where it comes in handy. This template that's rendering this is the homepage template that we're working on. So I can just remove with or today and just have with us, and I can start to see how my copy lays out. Maybe just like this. I kind of like that. So we'll close the preview and save our change. And there it is. So we've used a batch filter in Twig to batch our headline words into groups of 4 after we split them into an array. And then we iterated it over each batch and then over each word. And then the groups of words are inside the span, so we get the styling and the layout we desire. So we solved a problem with code that we might have asked our authors to do. Oh, make sure you only put 4 words on each line. We don't have to worry about any of that. We want our authoring experience to be nice. All right, so now we're ready to tackle the image. So for right now, we'll only output the image URL into the source attribute of the image tag. And in a future video, We'll look at asset transforms and make sure our images are properly sized for the context. And even later in the course, we'll look at lazy loading and eager loading in Craft to help with performance. But for right now, we'll keep it really simple. So back in our code, a bit further up in the code, remember we have this image element right here. And we have our image just statically listed in the source. So we'll remove that. And we'll just add in entry, which you have access to, and then image, which is the handle of the image field, and then one.url. So you can also do one like this since it's a method. All of these work just fine. So entry, image, and then .1 because we want to get one of the images. Even if there only is one, we still have to do .1 to query for that single image to return a single image. And then URL gets us the public URL to that single image. And for alt text, if you have alt text set up with the image, you can do that. For right now, we'll use the not optimal, but okay for now, entry.title for the alt. Now, if we go back, we get that same image because that's the one we have saved here. If I remove that and add a different image, this one, select that, save it, reload. There we go. So now we can start to see what our images look like. You know, I'm in here editing my home page. I'm going to preview and I can start to change up the images. Of course, it's going to error there because I don't check for no image. I can add in this here, see how that looks. That looks, I know, looks cool too. So we'll save that. And we reload, and there we go. We have our hero, which is now fully dynamic, and the content and the image is pulled from our homepage single. The next thing we want to do is output our trail running adventures. And for this content, we'll handle it by looping over the entries in our adventure section and then outputting them here. Now, this content here isn't tied to the homepage single. We're merely outputting another section's entry data onto the index.twig template. However, it's part of building out the homepage, so let's go ahead and get it done. Our first step is to close up this here so we get that hidden. And here are our trail running adventures, a little bit of a description. We'll leave that static for now. And then we have our adventures here. So the first thing I want to do is set a variable for the adventures. And to that, I will save the output from a element query in Craft. An element query is when we query for an element, whether that's categories or entries. And it's going to be craft.entries.section. And we will do adventures. That's the handle of the section that we saved in Craft. We're going to limit it to 10. And then we have to execute that query using .all. Now we are returned with a iterable object of adventures. So we have to loop over them to display them. So we will do for adventure in adventures, which we're referring to this here. And we'll go down and find the end of this block and do end 4. Now everything else here, all of these other hard-coded ones, we can just remove because we no longer need them since we'll be iterating over this and dynamically outputting them. Let's get rid of that. Now we need to populate our content. So scrolling up, first thing at the top here is the URL. Remember, this is a section, a channel section that has URLs for each entry. So we can't call entry, right? Because that refers to the home page, which is the single in terms of the context that we're in right now, the scope. It is adventure.url. That's going to get us the URL of the adventure. For the image, which is right here, we are going to output it as adventure dot. Now, in this case, we have multiple images. If we look back here to our adventures, and we go to images, you can see we have multiple images. I only need one. So I'm just going to query for one image, which would be the first image. So we'll do adventure dot, and then the field name, which is images, 1 to limit our element query to 1, and then the URL. So we'll get the URL of that image, and it'll be displayed here using the image element. Now here, the H3 is our adventure name, and this is going to be the adventure title, adventure.title. And then here is our description, and our handle for that is description, so it's adventure.description. We're just accessing everything via a dot and then the property. If we look back here, content, you can see here is our description right here. So here's a little bit of pro tip while you're working. If you go to your user account in Craft, go to preferences, and then go down to development and check show field handles in edit forms and save. Now when you go back and edit, over here you see we get this little clickable item here with the field handle, so I can just click and copy it to my clipboard, and it's easy for me to reference the handle. This is just for development for my user. I wouldn't want my content authors to see this. So now going back, you can see it's already reloaded, and we only have one entry in this section, but it has a image, a title, and a description. If I click on it, it brings us to a proper URL, and we can see the title right here. So now we know that this section here is working. And of course, you probably want to just test that a little bit with multiple entries to make sure that your loop is working as you expect it to. So also on the home page, we have down here these trail running locations. If you remember from our content modeling video earlier in the course, we decided to store these locations as categories. Now on the home page, we want to output these categories, as you see here, in a multi-column list with the name of the category and then the full URL to the category listing page, which will contain all of the running adventures for that location. Because the categories are displayed in this multi-column list, we'll need to use the batch filter again. We'll batch our categories into groups of 4, and each of these here is an individual unordered list. So for each one, we'll have an unordered list, and then we'll create a new unordered list until we run out of items. So let's jump in and code that and revisit our friend, the batch filter. So scrolling down, it is right here, trail running locations. And here's our first UL right there. So I'm going to go find the others. 1, 2, 3, and get rid of those because we don't need that static markup anymore. Same thing here. We only need one of these list elements. So we'll get rid of the others just to simplify our working space here. And now I'm going to work squarely within this UL right here. First thing I need to do is set my locations and also retrieve them. And we're going to do that with an element query, craft.categories. Probably good to spell that correctly. There we go. And I'm going to fetch the group locations. Remember, categories are organized as groups. And you can see the category groups are on the left. We named one locations, and it has the handle of locations. So locations, and we have to execute the query with .all. Next, we're going to do our batching, and we want to wrap our batch for loop around the UL element because we are going to create a new URL with each batch. So we'll do for, this needs to be locations, there we go. So for location we'll just do location set, like a set of locations. In locations, which is the data that we just retrieved, and then we'll batch those into groups of 4. And then for each of the locations in this location set, we want to output a list item. So another one is a for location in location set. Close our for loop. And down here, also close our for loop. Now we can just output our content. So here it would be location.title. And then for the href, it'll be location.url. And that's going to get the category URL for this category. So looking back, you can see that it's already rendered our page because we have our auto reload with Vite. And there is the location. I click on that and it brings me to location/Austin, Texas. And you can see the title there. So it's pointing to the right template. Now, again, we only have one location here. I'm going to create some more and then show you how that works. Okay, so I've just created some additional locations as categories. Now I'm going to reload and you can see that it does 4 and then splits off to a new UL and does 2 more. And it would keep going essentially until we limit how many it could show. So now we have our home page mostly coded except for our testimonials, which we will get to in the next video. But I do want to refactor a little bit and make these this header here and this footer reusable. So going back into my code, I got my main here, and that is our running adventures. That's our section. And I'm just going to go down to my footer, which is right here. So we're going to grab this footer and everything. Let's see, I think that is, yeah. And everything from body up. And we're going to put that into a layout template. So we'll create a new directory inside of our templates directory, layouts. And then inside of there, we'll create a new file. And we can call this whatever we want. We can call it main. We can call it shared. We can call it wrapper. Wrapper is a common one. And I use the underscore to make it a hidden template so that it could never be rendered on its own. Even though it's in an underscore directory, actually make that twig, I still do it anyway just for convention. All right, so we'll add that to Git. So I just need to grab that code. So everything here goes there. And then everything here goes there. And now in here, I want to create what's called a block. So a block is a way of designating an area of a template. So we'll just call it block main. This is the name of the block. And you have to have unique names in a set of templates. And then inside of here is where we will inject the specific templates, markup, and data. So now we have a wrapper template, right? This is the main wrapper template for the whole site. Now in our child template, we have to extend. So we're going to do extends, layouts, wrapper, and then we have to set up our block so Twig knows where to grab this markup and inject it. And so we say end block. So we're going to extend our layout template. We're going to designate our block. So everything inside of here is going to be injected into here. And this is empty, so we're essentially going to just inject it into there. So there's something in between our header and our footer. And then we are able to reuse this wrapper for every template on our site. And you can get really complex. You can have different layers of wrappers. I can actually break this up into just my core HTML and head. And then I can also have another one for the navigation and another one for the footer. But for now, we're going to keep it really simple because I really believe that you shouldn't be overly complex with your approach to templates at first. You can always add complexity later on. It's much harder to take it away once you get further involved in the project. So I reload, and you can see everything works just like it did before, except now when I build out some future templates, I already have this wrapper template that I can extend and then define my block and inject whatever template specific markup and data I need to. So we have our home page mostly coded. There's a little bit left to do, but we've made good progress so far in a short amount of time. All right, so stay tuned for the next video. There's a little bit for you to do on your own. One last thing I want to do on our homepage is take care of these testimonials that you see right here. So we just have a quote and then the author and the location. And you also have another one here at the bottom. In fact, there are some of these throughout the site. So I would like to create a way to handle these so that we can capture those testimonials and then display them on the site where we want them. So now it's time to work on your own again. And in this case, we're going to work on the testimonials, creating a channel, and working in our Twig code. So here's the assignment, and I'll follow up with another video after this one showing how I did it. And this is going to stretch you a little bit if you haven't done this before. It's going to make you think. Maybe you'll have to refer to the documentation to start to build your ideas, but that's the goal here, is to start to work on your own and think like a craft developer. So the first thing I want you to do is create and configure a channel section for the testimonials. Now that channel section is going to have one entry type, the default entry type, and you'll need to create the fields to capture that testimonials information. So that's going to be the testimonial text itself, the author, and the location. Then you want to take those fields and create the field layout inside of this section's entry type. And then after that, you'll want to add the Twig code to the home page to output one testimonial at a time and randomly. So that means that you'll want to use an element query to query for this section called testimonials, get one of them, and then order by randomly. So right now, your job is to get to work at the end of this video. And once you've taken your best stab at getting this work done, move to the next video and I'll show you how I did it. All right, good luck, and I'll see you in a few minutes. Okay, so how did it go on your own building out that testimonial section? So remember, we wanted to create a testimonial section to handle these testimonials that we have on the homepage, including the text of the testimonial and then the person's name and their location. And I recommended at least 3 different fields because you can see that the location is styled slightly different, and that might be a nice way to input the data. However, I wanted to leave it up to you to how to do it. And what I'm going to show you is just how I did it. And I did it in a way to hopefully also teach you something new and to maybe compare and contrast the way that you did it. Remember, in Craft CMS, there are so many different ways to solve the same problem that just because you didn't solve it the way that I solved it doesn't mean that your way was wrong and my way was right, or vice versa. It's just a different way of solving the same problem. So let's take a look here. You can see I have my testimonial section. I have a couple testimonials. We'll look at one here for this person, and I have a field, a plain text field for testimonial copy at the top. And then I have the byline. So I kind of combined this into a single field using the table field type, one for full name and one for location. And I did that because I didn't really feel comfortable having an extra field. Now I could have used the title as the full name, but then I would have to have the location anyway. So I instead just combine them into a byline field, and I use the table. So let's look at the settings on our fields. We'll go to testimonials. So the copy, again, is just a plain text field. There's not much going on there with the handle testimonial copy. For the byline, I have a table field, and the column heading is full name, single line text. The next column is location, single line text. Now I've given it a minimum of 1 row and a maximum of 1 row and a label of add a byline. This means that there has to be 1 row because a testimonial has to have a byline. And this means there can't be any more than 1 row because there can only be 1 byline per testimonial. So that's what we did. So let's look at our entry type for testimonials. So I have my testimonial copy and my byline. I put the copy on top and the byline below because that is how an author will see it when they're looking at the site. And I hid the title. So you can do that here where it says show the title field. So I have that unchecked. So in this case, I wanted my title to be automatically generated from the byline's full name. Now, because the byline is a table field type, so it has multiple rows, which means that it is returned to you in Twig and here in Craft as an array. I can't just do testimonial byline dot full name because even if there's 1 row, that row still is returned as an array, essentially a single item in the array. So what I did is using single curly braces, and that's what you do inside of Craft when you're outputting dynamic data in the field. You don't use the curly brace and %, and you also don't use the double curly braces to output, just the single curly braces. But I did testimonial byline, which is this field, and then the index of 0, which means the first row, and in this case, the only row, and then use full name, which is the name of the column using the entry property, which is dot full name for that field. And that outputs the full name that I inputted here as the title. And that gets me this here. So you can see how these names are populated here. That happens automatically. So if we create a new one, you can see it's already saved it at the top here using this full name as the entry title. And watch when I create the entry. There it is. So it used that code to create that title. And the reason I do that is because I want at a glance to be able to see the name of the person giving the testimonial. And that's a nice authoring experience because now I could possibly see, oh, do we already have one from Johnny or Ryan or Hannah? Why are we putting another one in there? So that's how I decided to represent that title. Now, I didn't have to do that, but I just thought that would be a nice touch. So let's look at our Twig code. So in our Twig code, we're in the index template. All the way at the top, I'm setting a variable called testimonials to the results of an element query, craft.entries section testimonials. I'm limiting it to 2, and that's because on the home page, I have 2 instances of testimonials. So I'm just going to limit to 2, only fetch what you need, not anymore. And I'm going to order it by, and then in single quotes, the random function. So capital R-A-N-D, rand. So it's basically a SQL function that's going to just randomly pick 2 entries out of this section when it does the query. And then I did .collect, and this is new in Craft 4 with Laravel collections. Just search for that here on CraftQuest, and you can learn all about collections. But essentially, it returns this as an array with some special helper methods. That's kind of like the quick and dirty of it. And I did that because I want to access each of these 2 testimonials individually using the first method and the last method. And since I'm just doing 2, it was kind of an easy way to get access to them. So this element query is randomly choosing 2 entries from the testimonial section and returning them as a Laravel collection. So then what I do is further down where we are displaying these, if we can find them, there we are. So the first thing I'm doing, this is my block here with this testimonial content module. We have our curly quotes, which we are hard coding into the template, so they're always properly formatted. And then I'm outputting testimonials, referring to that variable that I set at the top of the template, .first, which is a special Laravel collections method. This is not a .first that we used to have back in Craft 2 days, where you could get the first returned item. This is for Laravel collections. And then .testimonial copy is the field. And that outputs the testimonial. Now, further down, I am getting the same thing, testimonials .first, and then the byline. And the same thing like we did for our dynamic title is I'm just accessing the row as an array using the index. So 0, because there's only going to be one row, and then .full name, which is the column handle. And the same thing here for the location. .location, that's the column handle. Now I have this in 2 different places. Here I have it first. And then further down, I'm accessing last, which is the second of the 2 that is returned. Otherwise, everything is the same. So scrolling all the way back up, what happens here is when I am retrieving randomly these 2, it's always going to retrieve usually 2 different ones. Of course, I only have 3 in my system, so it won't do that. But the idea is that it would just randomly choose some, and you're always going to have 2. You'll always access them by first, the first one that's returned, and last, the last one that's returned, as they're stored in the collection. And then we're going to output them and access those rows by the index. So the result is when I reload, it runs the query again, and you can see it changes, usually, which ones are showing. And it's never going to show the same one twice on the page here because I am using those Laravel collections first and last methods. So that is one way to do testimonials. There are all sorts of different ways. And the reason I did it this way is because I wanted to only query for and return exactly the amount of data that I need for this template. There's a lot more that you can do here. You can probably break this out into its own content module that is reused across the site. And that may be an enhancement and a refactor opportunity for us in the future. So I hope you had fun doing that work on your own. Good job. No matter what your solution was, I'm glad that you worked through it on your own. So good work on that. All right, we are making progress. And with our homepage now coded and the testimonials work that you just did is complete, we're ready to tackle the adventures single entry template. So when we click on an adventure, we're going to complete this template at /adventures and then the slug for those adventures. So this is the template that's going to show our individual adventure with the content, the stats, and the images. And let's just go back to the control panel and refresh our memory on what we've built. Since it's been a little while, we have created a channel called Adventures. And inside of there, we created a field layout with the different fields. We have our title, our description, our location, which is a category. And then we have this content builder that we created where we have the ability to create stats, call to action links with text and a URL, and then a rich text field. And then again, we can repeat as many as those as we need. And we also have 1 or more images that we can add, which will also display on that entry page. All right, so let's first set up our template. So we have already created it. It's in adventures, so templates, adventures, and then _entry. So let's remove our placeholder here. And we're going to set this up. So we've already learned how to extend a layouts template. So we'll do extends and it's going to be layouts wrapper.twig. And you can also just do wrapper like that too, and define the block that we're going to override in that layout. So block main, and then end block. Now if I go back here and reload, we see our footer, but it's missing our header. And I think it's because I made a mistake when we were creating our layout. And maybe you caught that already. So if I look over here, this right here is in our home page, which is this div right above main. And this should be included because this is actually the header with the navigation. This should be in our shared layout. So I'm going to take that out, go into layouts. Let's fix this up all the way to the top. We'll close our head. There's our body. We'll drop that in there, save it. There we go. And that's how we want it to look. Okay, so we have this wrapper here. So now we need to drop in our custom markup and code just for our entry page. So from the templates that you downloaded as part of the project, there's adventure-entry.html. So we're going to go in and find main here. And we'll grab everything inside of main. So what I'm doing is I'm just collapsing it and then highlighting it. And in my IDE, that will grab everything without having to scroll so much. So we'll close our wrapper and then back in our entry template in between the block tags, I'm going to drop in main, and that is going to be all of the markup for our entry page. So let's save that and take a look. There we are. So now you can see the images aren't going to render because the paths are broken, and that's fine. We're going to take care of that in a little bit. So this is how it's going to look. So the reason I do it like this is because I like to see the page rendered properly before I start to add in the Twig code. That helps me identify that the problem is something that I did and not maybe some messed up markup or something like that, that it's actually the Twig code. So just like with a single, we are in a single entry view, which means that we automatically get the entry data from Craft in our Twig template. And that's because we have told Craft that adventures/_entry is the single entry view for this section. So Craft automatically delivers our entry data. That means we don't have to query for that data. We just have it automatically. So let's start here at near the top with the title, which is in this H1 right here. And we'll just replace this with entry. That's the object we get automatically, and then .title. And you can see it there. It's going to be called the same thing, big bend bounce, but we don't have any errors, so everything is looking good. Now we're going to move on to the description. And let's see, I'm just going to collapse the images for right now. So here's the description. We'll get that, remove it, and then do entry.description to output the description. And there it is right there. And now we're going to do these stats, the call to action, and the rich text. So what we've done so far is pretty straightforward, right? Just entry and then the field handle. But the content builder is powered by Matrix. So the first thing I want to do, just so we're not getting confused, is identify the markup for each of our different blocks in our Matrix field, and then we'll label that using Twig comments. All right, so here is where our content with the description begins, right here. So I'm going to say this is the content. And then this right here is our description. So I'm just going to collapse that so it's out of the way. And now I know this next section is our matrix field. So we'll make this our matrix field. We'll just say matrix field. So it's clear what this is. And that's where it starts. If I collapse this down, we have some more here and here. And this is the end of the matrix field. So you may be wondering why I'm doing like this. And this is just so when we're starting to build out switching between the different matrix block types, that it's clear where we're going to work. Okay, so next we have this total miles section here. We want to identify this as our stats. So right here we'll comment stats. And this goes all the way, let's actually collapse it here, to here. And we'll say end stats. All right, so that's all the stats there. We'll just confirm. And stats, okay, so I see a CTA here, call to action. Okay, so we're just going to move that out since it's kind of in the wrong spot. There we go. So this is end stats. And then this one is a call to action right here. And end call to action. And I think this one down here is also a call to action. You only need one of each. So we'll just remove that. And this one should be our rich text content here. And then this goes all the way down here to basically the end of the matrix field. So we'll mark that as end rich text content. Okay, now we know where each of those different blocks are. And that's going to make it much easier as we're working. At the top, let's first query for our matrix field. So we'll say for block in entry, which is the entry object, and the name of the field, which is content builder, and then .all. So this is an element query, and so we have to execute it in order to get the data. For this implementation, we are going to use a switch statement to make it simpler than using like conditionals and checking for the block type and then outputting something. We'll just switch on the block type and then output the markup and twig code for each block type when that case is true. So we'll say for block in entry content builder all, and then down here we'll do end for. And now we want to start our switch statement. So switch, and we're switching on block.type. So remember, type is the handle name for that block, whether that's stats or rich text. It's what we have over in here, settings, fields, content builder. It's this here, block type, rich text, CTA, stats. Now we are going to end our switch right here. And we're going to set up our cases. So for stats, case, and then the handle of that block type, stats, then we're going to output the stats. And then for our next case, and we don't have to end the case, we can, it'll happen automatically. So we just do another case, then case, rich text. Oops, actually this one's call to action. We'll just move this over. And then finally, our case, rich text, and then end switch and end for. So let's save that and see how we did so far. Okay, no errors. And I see everything is still outputting here. So that's good. None of this is dynamic yet except for the title and the description because we haven't added our twig code inside of those blocks. Let's do that now. So going back in, we're going to start at the top for stats. we'll look through here. So this is one of the stats. Now each stat is set up as a definition list, and each one is set up as term and definition. Now I need to iterate over the stat in each one because remember we are setting these up as a table. So I have to iterate over it. So the whole thing is a definition list. And then inside of there, we'll say for stat in block.stat. Remember, we're switching on blocks. We're going to output this and then end for. And then here, we need to output the name of the stat. So that's going to be stat dot name and stat dot value. And this maps to the column name of name and the column name of value in our table where we're storing our stats. So if we go back here, you can see it right here, name and value. So that's what we're iterating over, is the rows in this table field. Okay, so you can see we have some stuff. We have a lot of extra here because we need to clean up our static markup. So we're going to go down and find all these additional terms and remove them up until the end of our loop, right there. So at the end, we should have our definition list looping over the div, which is the term and the definition, and our twig code, and enclosing the definition list tag. And then that should be it. And there you go. So now we have our stats. So if I go in and change one, let's say that the elevation gain is 9,400 feet. Reload, and there you go. So we're pulling this all in dynamically now. If I added another set of stats, those would appear wherever I add them in this content builder. So if down here I added stats again, so let's save that. Now that should appear at the bottom, right? Because we are iterating over all the blocks in order. And there it is right there. All right, let's do the rest. We have the rich text and the call to actions. So same thing here, case CTA. We just need to make this dynamic with our field handles. So looking back, we have here cta.text and cta.cta URL. So this is going to be block.url and then block.text. Save that. Look back here, and we have our call to action. One there. We should have one here. And let's see. Doesn't look like the URL is working. Because it's actually CTA URL. There we are. Since URL is a reserved handle. There it is. Now it's working. So now we have our CTA done. Let's collapse that so we can get to our rich text. Now there's a lot of stuff in here. All of this markup with paragraph tags and copy and unordered list. This is all just sample copy in the H2. We can get rid of all of this and replace it with block.rich text. And looks like it is not working. So what are we missing? Going back and confirming. Aha, it's called text, not rich text. Save that. There we go. There's our text. We have our call to actions. You can see we have two blocks of text, one here, one here. We have our call to actions in between and additional stats at the bottom. If I wanted to go in and add some more rich text, I could do that here. and maybe one more call to action. Save that. Let's reload here. There you go. You can see our extra content here and our final call to action. Okay, so that's looking good. We have our content builder built. Now, if I go in here and do preview, we're going to fix this image thing where they're at the top. I'm going to have those at the bottom. But let's say I want to move our call to action. I don't want it there. I want to move it somewhere else. Maybe, let's see. I'm going to move it right there. See, it reloads, and the call to action is down here. Just like that. So we're able to, as an author, move the different chunks, the different modules of the content builder around and see it appear right in that layout. All right, so the last thing I want to do are these images. So in our code, we're going to go all the way up to the top. So the first thing I want to do, it's right here, is I'm going to take this and I'm going to actually move these down to the bottom. Now the layout should be exactly the same, but when we go to a smaller viewport like this, you can see the images aren't going to hog up the top of the page. And that's what we want. We just want to reorder the source. Okay, so let's look at our images. I'm going to unnest these. It's pretty straightforward. There's multiple images, but we only need one instance of these figure elements here since we are going to iterate over it. And we're just going to fetch those images and then output them. So let's get the images. Set images equals entry.images.all. We have to execute an element query to get those and have them returned. And then we'll iterate over it. For image in images, close our for loop. And for the image URL, remove the placeholder and do image.url. And for the alt, we'll just do image.title, which will pull from the asset title itself. And we'll leave our width and height as they are right now until we talk about assets and transforms. We're also not doing any lazy loading or eager loading in this instance, and we'll talk about that in a future video as well. So let's take a look, and you can see here are our images. In fact, if I go in to the Images tab and reorder these images and save it, they will reorder here as well since we're just pulling them in order. So now we have our entry page for adventures all created. We used images and a title field, a description field, and then we wrote the code to output our content builder content with matrix and a switch tag so we could address each of the cases based on the different matrix blocks that we used. All right, we're making great progress. Let's keep going, and I'll see you in the next video. Now it's time for you to work on your own again, and nothing is more empowering and energizing than taking your newly learned skills and knowledge and putting them to work. So that's what we're going to do here again. So this time it's all about the singles that we created for the FAQs and for the About page, and I'd like you to create the templates for those. Now the single template that we've created up to this point was the home page. And really, it's almost the exact same thing. It's just different markup. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to code the single template for the About page, going to code the single template for the FAQs page, and make sure you build on what we've already done. So extend that layout template that we already created, create your block, and then put the markup that is specific for that template inside of it. Now, in the next video, I'm going to walk through how I did it and show you how I did it, and you can compare it to how you did it. Now, remember, there are so many different ways in Craft and in web development in general to do the same thing. So just take the way that I did it as how I did it, and know that you may have a slightly different solution for your own work. So in the control panel, we have our singles. And again, it's the FAQs and the About page. And these have a title and some copy using a rich text field via Redactor. Now, because these are singles, they're treated just like single entries, essentially. So when you use your template, you'll get access to all of the content and data for that single via the entry variable. And the reason Craft knows is because when we set up that single section, like the About section here, we told it that this is the template to use and this is the URI. And so Craft knows when it's this URI, this template, you automatically get this entry variable with all of the data. So that means you don't have to query for it. You just get it automatically, like entry.title. You'll get the title of the single. So in your static templates that you downloaded for this project, there is a template called content-page. This is the one you want to use. You want to use it for both of these singles that you're going to be coding. And what I would recommend is ignore everything above the main element and just grab all, and then of course ignore the footer. Just grab everything inside of main. That's all you'll need to drop inside of your block. And then you can go through and customize this with the title here. And then you can take, you probably can take this excerpt out. And then anything inside of this div with the class of prose, you can remove all of that content markup, including the figure and all of that, and just replace it with the twig tag to output the contents of the redactor field. Earlier in the course, we created our about.twig template and our FAQs.twig template with just some placeholder comment in there to say what it is. So these are the two templates that you'll want to use. If for some reason you didn't create them before, you want to go ahead and create them now. All right, good luck. Take some time to work on this yourself. Struggle a little bit, that's okay. Work through the whole thing, get it working, and then watch the next video, and I'll show you how I did it. Okay, so I hope that went well for you, and you were able to get both the About template and the FAQs template coded. If you did, and you go to your local host and then *8/about, you should see something that looks like this, and it should be rendering your content dynamically. So let's look at the template that we used to get an idea of how it works. So we'll go to the about.twig template first, and you can see the first thing we're doing is we are extending our wrapper layout by extends and then passing in the relative path to that template. And then we're defining our block called main. So we're opening it here and ending it. And inside of here, we have our markup. In our case, it's really simple. There's not a lot going on. We just have our wrapper divs. Just wrap that. There we go. So this is our H1, and it's just entry.title. Here's our div to format our rich text field using the prose class in the typography plugin for Tailwind. And we're using entry.richText. That's the name of the field. And that's all there is to it. And that's what provides us this about single template. Now you might be thinking, well, if FAQs is basically the same thing, which you can see right here, it is, why wouldn't we just use the same template? You can actually see I copied this in. So it does show it's actually the same exact template. And the reason I'm not using the same template is because in the future, I have plans in the future fictional life of this site to make this FAQs page to be more dynamic. I'm going to set up an FAQ section where each question and answer is an own entry in that section. And so I already want to break it out into its own template. However, if I didn't have any plans to do that, then I could just actually have a single content page template that is just reused for all of these single type pages. But since I have future plans, I just made FAQs its own template and about.twig its own template, but they are essentially the same exact markup and twig code. So that's really all there is to it. Everything else is all done in configuration, which we did earlier in the course. But this is it. You just want to extend, set up your main block, drop in entry.title, entry.rich text, and you are good to go. So I hope you came up with something that was similar to this. Maybe you decided you wanted to collapse it down into a single template. That's great too. If you have any questions, you can drop them into the comments part of this video or just email me, support@craftquest.io, and I'm happy to help out. All right, congrats on getting this far in the course. We're going to continue on with coding some more templates. So back on the homepage, I want to focus in on this trail running adventures listing that lists out all of the adventures. So you can see we just have 2 right now, but we could go as many as 2 rows and get 8. So in this video, we're going to talk about image transforms and eager loading. Both of them are ways to improve the performance of our images. So if I look at this, I'm just going to inspect this. You can see that, let me just pull this down. And you can see right here that the natural size of this is 6,000 essentially by 4,000, give or take, right? 6016 by 4016. That is way too big for what is effectively rendered. Let's just see what the rendered size is. 280 by 186 in this viewport size here, and maybe like 600 by 400 once we collapse down and it goes full width. So that makes me think that I should never render an image larger than 600 by 400. So if I make this a little bit smaller, you can see it. So right there, right there at that breakpoint, this becomes, so if we look at this, we can see it's about like 581 by 387. So we'll just call it 600 by 400. So that's the maximum size I need for these images. Because of that, I want to create a transform which will resize the image to that maximum size, and then we can call that size in our code so we get that transform. So in the control panel, we're going to go to settings and then to assets, and we want to choose image transforms. We don't have any image transforms yet, but we're going to create our first one. We can give it a name, and we should use a name that describes its usage. In this case, I want to call it Adventures Listing. And this is going to be an image transform that we use in this context here. For our mode, we are going to choose crop and then center. And remember, it's going to be 600 by 400. Of course, every site is going to be different. You may have to have multiple different transforms depending. For right now, we're just going to have one that we're going to call. We're not going to call it different sizes or anything like that. And for the quality, we'll leave it at auto, no interlacing, and auto image format. And you can see we automatically get our handle here. We'll need this for our code. And then save. So now we have our first image transform. And now to get this to work, we have to call it in our code and then Craft, the first time that that transform is requested, Craft will create it and then use it for any time after that. So let's see, Adventures Listing. Let's go into our code and we'll go to our home page and then look down here for our trail running adventures, which is right here. And you can see I'm just getting the adventures, craft entries section, adventures, limiting it to 10, and then .all. And then for the image, I'm just doing adventure images. That's the field handle. 1, which is to get the first one. And then I'm outputting the URL. So here is where I can append opening and close parentheses. and then as a string, pass in the name of the transform, which is adventures listing. So now what Craft will do when it goes to display this, it'll say, oh, okay, I'm getting this image at this URL with this transform. So we'll save that. Now you can see my page is reloading. And if I inspect this right here, you can see now that it's 600 by 400. And we've also have an asset that was created. If you just look at this URL right here, it's now _adventures listing. So that's the handle of the transform with an underscore prepended and then the image. So Craft goes in and it resizes and crops that image, center, and then now it's available. So now we're delivering 1/10 of the size of what we were before for each image. So much smaller in terms of the network. So if I reload this and go to images, you can see that we're now rendering much smaller images here. And you can see how big this main one is up here. But down here, we're rendering something way, way smaller than we were before. So this is all just like performance and web developer responsibility 101, but this is how we do it in Craft. Now, another thing to consider, in addition to our transforms for loading the smallest image possible that we need, is to think about the N+1 issue. And that's because when we load images during an element query and a for loop, like we are with these here, the Craft will fetch all the information for the entry, and then it runs a query to get the image. If we look at our code, this .1 is essentially like running .all, except we're just asking for 1. It's running a query here and returning the image, and then we're getting the URL and this transform. So for each of these entries in for adventure in adventures, we're querying for all the entry data, and then for each of those entries, we're running at least one other query, maybe 2 for the transform to get that data as well. So we can have an N+1 issue if we got a lot of entries. If business was booming, we were offering these trail running adventures all over the place, and we had maybe the most recent like 30 on the homepage, we could have some performance issues. So we are going to remedy that with eager loading our images and the transforms. And that way we grab everything we need up front rather than delaying it until we're in the loop for each of these adventures. Now in Craft 4, there's been some changes to how eagerly loaded elements work. All eager loaded elements in Craft 4 are returned as collections, so Laravel collections, and I have a lot of videos and articles on that here on CraftQuest. So they're returned as collections instead of data arrays. And because of this change, we don't need to change our code one bit for how we access the data that is returned from an eagerly loaded element. So to do this, we just need to make a couple changes here. So I'm going to just break this down into several lines so it's a little bit easier to read as we are adding some more complexity here. So section adventures, and we use the .with method. So the with method to say we want to fetch all adventures with these other things. In this case, it's going to be with images, and we're putting it in square brackets because we can fetch multiple things. And images is the handle for the field, for that assets field. So now if I reload, we still have it. Everything is still working, but we're now reloading these eagerly. So you might not believe me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dump in die adventures so we can see what it looks like. And then I'm just going to search for eager right here. And you can see that we have some eager loaded elements that are returned as collections, and the handle is images. So these are now getting eager loaded. All right. So all this data is being fetched ahead of time. Now remember, because of the changes in Craft 4, these are being returned here as collections. And also later in Craft 4, they alias .1 to the .first method in collections. So I don't even have to change this code either. So one other enhancement that we can make is that we can also eager load this transform as well. Since that can also cause n+1 issues, we just remove our dump and die and change up our width here. So we have width, and then inside of here, so we're going to open and close square bracket, and then we have our images, and then right before the closing square bracket next to images, we're going to do curly brace and use with transforms, and then pass in the handle for the transform we want to eager load along with the images. In this case, adventure listing is the name of our transform. And remember, we have that here in settings, assets, transform right here. And we close the curly brace and the square bracket, and then the last square bracket, and then we have limit 10, and then .all. Now, even though we're using .all, it's still going to return a collection for these eager loaded elements, because that's the change in Craft 4. So we're eager loading our images along with this transform, so it's available automatically. So we'll save that. Back here, we'll reload. And it says invalid transform handle adventure listing. So let's take a look. Aha, I got the wrong name. It's adventures listing. Make sure we get that right. There we go. And now we have it. So now we have our adventures listing. And you can see that we have knocked off a query or two from our overall database queries. But the most important thing is that this should now be more performant as we add additional adventures. So this has minimal impact right now because our site is really small, but it's important to know this best practice and that it is going to pay dividends going forward as you add more data output to your templates. So just to review, we are setting our adventures variable to the results of this element query. Craft entries .section adventures with the field handle images and with this transform. So we're eager loading the images and the transforms, and we're still limiting it to 10. .all, anything that is eager loaded is going to be returned as a collection. And we can still access all of this here the same way. Adventure images .1, that is a craftism. It's also aliasing the first method on the collection. Then we're getting the URL with this transform. It's already eager loaded, so it's just sitting in the wings and waiting for us. And now we have the speedy template with our trail running adventures. So that's how you use asset transforms for images and eager load those images and the transforms for a really good starting point for a performing site. All responsible web developers consider refactoring or improving their code as they go. My approach is to always take the simplest path first and then learn from that and then refactor. So in this case, I'm starting to realize that I could probably refactor a little bit so that we have an easier go of it down the road as we build out more templates. So one example is the adventures listing. So if I go down right here, let's see, down to the bottom right here. So we have trail running adventures. We have this little description, and then we're getting our adventures. This is the thing we just worked on with our